Alright, guys, so something big just happened. The US just made a very bold move, and we are heading closer and closer towards a very messy confrontation. Now, under Biden, the US has been losing a lot of ground geopolitically. Now, we all remember the mess with the Saudis. Latin America has been moving more towards China as well. But what Rubio did, Blinken's replacement, is unprecedented. He went all the way to Panama to make demands, and once again it revolves around China. Now, Rubio calls Chinese presence at the Panama Canal unacceptable, and he wants them out. And if Panama doesn't comply, well, the US will take action, and one can guess what that threat means. Now, this is a clear sign that the US wants to stop China's economic influence. They can see BRICS is growing. Rubio himself is afraid of the US losing the power to sanction countries thanks to de-dollarization. So, US foreign policy is all about stopping China from building international influence. And the first step is to secure the Western Hemisphere.
Secretary of State Rubio is in Panama right now, and we're talking about the Panama Canal. What they've done is terrible. They violated the agreement. They're not allowed to violate the agreement. China's running the Panama Canal. That was not given to China. That was given to Panama foolishly. But they violated the agreement, and we're going to take it back, or something very powerful is going to happen.
Now, the agreement centers around neutrality, that the US will relinquish control by the year 2000, and in return, Panama has to be neutral. Which is really weird. The US views the presence of Chinese companies there as a threat. And it's no secret that China has invested heavily in the ports and terminals near the canal. Now, the port is important to China's trade routes. Over 21% of the cargo transiting the canal belongs to Chinese trade, and this makes it the second largest user after the United States. As a result, they have invested a ton of money to build the infrastructure there. They have even built a bridge. Now, the port of Balboa and Cristobal are operated by a Hong Kong company, and it seems that is enough to set the US off. While the US spends a lot on the military, China spends their money on building economies. It's a very big difference. Now, Rubio's obsessed with the idea that China controls the gateways to the canal, that in a time of conflict, China would deny access to US vessels. But that's not how the canal works. The ports are just places to handle the cargo. To shut it down, the Chinese, they have to bring in their warships, and that would be highly unlikely. Now, did Rubio's visit yield any concrete results? Surprisingly, it did. And yes, on the surface, this looks like a very big win for the United States. Panama will now optimize the transit priority of US Navy ships. In other words, US Navy vessels can cut the queue. Secondly, they will get free passage, so the US government won't have to pay a dime in a toll. Now, this sounds like the US government is somehow in control of the canal, right? But what's coming ahead doesn't sound good for China, because Panama might be bowing completely to US pressure. Now, does that mean Chinese infrastructure will be divested away or seized? And can the Hong Kong company still operate their ports in Panama that they invested in? And all these are serious questions we need to ask.
Una cosa importante, que es una decisión que adopté y se la comuniqué. El memorándum de entendimiento del año 2017 sobre la ruta de la seda de Belt and Road Initiative no será renovado por mi gobierno. A la vez, tratar la medida de lo posible de que se incrementen las inversiones de los Estados Unidos en Panamá.
But at this moment, it seems that the Panama government has freaked out. They have taken the path of appeasement, and their priority is to just keep the canal sovereign to Panama. So the government has thrown their lot with the United States. They have decided to end their membership in China's Belt and Road Project. And in 2026, Panama would be out of the BRI. Instead, they're going to embrace the United States and hope that Trump will invest in their infrastructure ahead. Now, I say good luck to that. And we are seeing the US use their leverage and the Navy to force geopolitical outcomes. Panama might have chosen to work with China at first, but essentially, they were bullied into submission. Now, this situation is horrible. It's shocking for China as well, because the US is now firing on all fronts. They are using tariffs to bring back manufacturing. They are using curbs on China's semiconductor industry, and now using the US Navy to try and push China out of Latin America. Now, listen to what Rubio said. He has admitted that the US is no longer the global hegemon, and we are moving towards an age of multiple great powers.
So it's not normal for the world to simply have a unipolar power. That was an anomaly. It was the product of the end of the Cold War. But eventually you were going to reach back to a point where you had a multipolar world, great powers in different parts of the planet. We face that now with China and to some extent, Russia. And then you have rogue states like Iran and North Korea you have to deal with. So now more than ever, we need to remember that foreign policy should always be about furthering the national interest of the United States and doing so to the extent possible, avoiding war and armed conflict.
Now, from this and American actions, we can see that the US, they're trying to consolidate their hemisphere, their part of the world, to strengthen their position of regional hegemon of the Americas, which means sooner or later, the US will try to make inroads into other Latin American countries, especially those with Chinese presence like Peru and Brazil. It's important to note that China has not officially responded to this yet. They're still waiting and calculating. Now, sure, Panama leaving the BRI is significant, but it doesn't mean their influence in Latin America will collapse. Now, what China is more focused on today is the trade war with the United States. And as we all know, Trump, he has slapped an additional 10% tariff on Chinese goods. Now, firstly, the US economy is going to hurt more than Beijing. China's GDP could drop by 0.1% and 600,000 jobs would be lost. But look at the US figures in bold. GDP would drop by 0.4% and 330,000 jobs could be lost. And that is just a conservative estimate. It doesn't even factor in any foreign retaliation yet. So the economic damage could be far worse in any case. Now, many analysts are saying US GDP could fall by over 100 basis points. Inflation could also rise by 0.7%. And that's going to reflect very poorly on Trump's scorecard because his brand is always about winning, winning, and winning. Canada, Mexico, and China, they are America's three biggest trading partners, and almost 50% of trade comes from these countries. When you decide to tariff them, US consumers will be forced to pay more. So you are in fact hammering your own people. Trump is pushing his own economy off a cliff. Now, China has many levers they can pull. The passive approach, of course, is to boost your own domestic consumption, to launch a ton of stimulus to get people to buy more local goods. But China can also hurt the US in a tit-for-tat retaliation.
In the very near future, we're going to be placing tariffs on foreign production of computer chips, semiconductors, and pharmaceuticals to return production of these essential goods to the United States of America. They left us and they went to Taiwan, which is about 98% of the chip business, by the way.
The most direct way to hurt the US economy is to hammer on their high-tech industries. China could always weaponize their supply chains and squeeze America's weak point. The US has a chronic shortage of critical inputs. Now, Beijing could always ramp up import curbs of critical minerals to US companies. In 2023, China halted gallium exports for 2 whole months. This is a critical input for making semiconductors. And because China refines 94% of the world's supply, they have enormous pricing power. Within half a year, prices of gallium soared, doubling in price. Now, another clear target for Beijing would be US agriculture. This would be a double whammy for US farmers. Firstly, all their gear and machinery would have to be sourced domestically. Now, that's what the 25% tariff on Mexico was for, to make companies like John Deere force them to manufacture back in the US. Beijing can simply drop their imports of soybeans and other foods from the US. Now, this happened before during Trump's first trade war. It went from 30 million tons in 2017 to under 3 million tons just a year later. That is a 70 to 80% drop. US farmers are going to get squeezed on both sides. Higher production costs from Trump's tariffs and collapsing demand from China's retaliation. Now, Beijing isn't clueless here, guys, and we shouldn't mistake silence as compliance. They know the Achilles heel of the US economy, and in 2018, Beijing demonstrated that with their retaliation. After the US started the trade war, after Trump's 301 tariff announcement, China targeted $45 billion of US exports to China. Beijing hammered down on agriculture. 38% of Chinese tariffs hit US food products. Beijing hammered down on agriculture. 38% of Chinese tariffs hit US food products. US vehicles to China were also clobbered, but focused on intermediate goods. These are the inputs needed for China's manufacturing industry. By tariffing those, Beijing has decided to remove the US from their supply chain. They would rather take the hit now than suffer later. If you're in the US, understand how deadly Trump's tariffs are going to be. Your cost of living is going to rise and is an across the board inflation crisis. Energy inflation will rise thanks to tariffs on Canadian oil. Delivery trucks and car parts will also cost more as well thanks to tariffs on Mexico. China will also make consumer inflation rise. Your laptops, your cell phone, or your iPhones and television will all cost more amongst others. The US can also kiss goodbye to affordable electric batteries as well. EVs made in America, well, they're going to cost a bomb. The last thing you need is for China to start imposing their own tariffs. We need to state that there's a good chance that the US is bluffing here. Now, a lot of things have happened over the last 24 hours. The tariffs on Mexico and Canada, they have been halted for now. Trump got what he wanted for both countries to stem the flow of migrants into the US. Mexico, for example, they have pledged 10,000 soldiers to guard the border. Now, Trump is indeed using tariffs as a bargaining chip of sorts, but there's still a very big risk that he might overplay his hand. But what does he want from China? Simple, more trade. Now, for Trump, China is going to be a transactional relationship. It's all about getting the Chinese to buy more US goods. But will this work? Because China has been exporting a lot less to the US over the past few years. Their dependence on the US market isn't the same as 10 years back or even just 5 years ago. Trump likely wants China to reach the 2020 trade deal amount for them to buy nearly $400 billion of US products. Now, in December 2021, it reached $237 billion, far below the 400 mark. But today, it's even worse. China bought less than $140 billion worth in 2024. The US doesn't produce much finished goods, so buying more will be a problem. The only avenue left is food and energy imports. But does China want to be reliant on the US for these critical supplies? It's a very big question. Trying to reverse the decoupling will be like trying to pull teeth. Beijing has seen a lot over the past decade. There's the issue of asset confiscation, the Russia issue. Trump's first trade war also happened. Let's not forget about Biden's technology sanctions as well as the TikTok saga. Now, I don't believe they will reverse any decoupling plan for long. The trust simply isn't there anymore. So we have to brace for impact here. China might very well give some concessions, but the broader picture isn't really going to change. We can expect bigger geopolitical competition, more importantly, a further decoupling of supply chains, and US China bilateral trade. But let me know what you think. Will the US continue to strong arm countries against China? And how will Beijing retaliate against this? Let me know in the comments below. Stay safe. Be sure to smash the like button and subscribe as we navigate through these crazy times.